We now return to Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute, the radio show discussing the honest truth about Illinois policy and politics. Here's AM 560's Dan Proft.
Dan Proft back with Pat Hughes, co-founder of the Illinois Opportunity Project, and this edition of Illinois Rising. And didn't get a lot of bad ideas passed out of the Illinois General Assembly this session because you've got a governor acting as a backstop to try, and some Republicans as well, to try and stop the same big government failed leftist policy choices that have Illinois, the worst governed state in the nation, downgraded this week, by the way, credit rating downgraded by Moody's to just above junk. We are going to become the first state in the nation's history to ever be junk rated. That is in the offing. But meanwhile, back at the ranch with the Democrat caucuses as the session closed, you still have them advancing more mandates on businesses that are fleeing this state, more job-killing wage setting and regulation, including a legislation sponsored by Will Guzzardi, Democrat rep from Chicago, that passed the House to increase the state's minimum wage to $15 an hour.
Yeah, Dan, and the thing about this is, which is so insidious, is the economic realities of a wage increase of this type are negative for job creation. They're negative for business creation. They're positive for people leaving the state and out migration. But it's got that feel-good quality to it that they can package and narrate, and then the public oftentimes believes that. Sometimes these things have major public support. So that's what's insidious about it. It's a political ploy to make it look like they're doing something positive for poor people, when in fact it's the opposite.
Well, and for more on this topic, we're joined by one of the great economists in the country. He is George Mason economics professor, Walter Williams. Professor Williams, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning.
Good morning. And so you've written extensively on this topic over the years, and you must get tired of having to address the same bad idea over and over again. But in Illinois, we're, of course, the epicenter of bad ideas. And so we're continuing to advance this idea under Democrat control of our state legislature. And it's against the backdrop of the city of Chicago having the highest black unemployment of any urban center in the country. The Democrats' answer is to pass a $15 mandatory minimum wage. What's your response to that?
I think that's just adding more fuel to the fire. That is one of the problems is the minimum wage. And what many people do not know, I guess most people don't know, that at one time in our history, black teenage unemployment was lower than white teenage unemployment. In fact, I've written on it in my book, Race and Economics. And for example, the exact numbers are, in 1948, white teenage unemployment was 10.2%, and black teenage unemployment was 9.4%. And today, there's not many places that you can go where you find black teenage unemployment under 40%. In some places, it's 50 and 60%. And so a lot of it has to do with not only the minimum wage, but all kinds of labor regulations. And then the grossly rotten schools that black kids attend puts them at a competitive disadvantage.
Professor Williams, given the things that you've written about regarding minimum wage and some of these other factors, and sort of what's known economic theory that has led to policy on the right with respect to minimum wage, that this is bad for poor people, it's bad for people of color. What is your theory, or do you have one, as to why progressive politicians, big city Democrat politicians, push the minimum wage?
Well, I think that if, according to a number of surveys, most Americans are for increasing the minimum wage. And the reason why most Americans are for doing so is that they care about the welfare of their fellow men. They think that they're helping them out. Now, there's some people who push the minimum wage, and they have more insidious motives, and that's maybe labor unions and other organizations that want to use the minimum wage law to price their competition out of the market. And so, and I think that one of the things we need to look at is look at the cruelty of the minimum wage. For example, take there's a waitress or cashier, and she's making $30,000 a year. She doesn't have very high skills. She's making maybe $30 or $35,000 a year. Okay, and she's getting maybe an hourly pay of $9 or $10. Now you raise the minimum wage to $15. Then there's incentive for the company to put in kiosks, that is, to put in automatic machines to get rid of a cashier. Now here you have a person that was making $30 or $30,000 a year, which is no great shakes, but it's damn sure better than making $0 a year and being on unemployment or being on welfare. And so what we see as a result of the minimum wage, you go to Wawa, you go to Panera, you go to these other places, and you see kiosks where people punch in their the desired item that they want, and that gets rid of the waiter. So I think that the rise in the minimum wage law is also increasing the rate of automation in our country and putting people out of jobs.
Sure. Yeah, I mean the burger machines and so those sorts of things that are already being beta tested in fast food restaurants. And I guess one of the things too, though, that becomes confusing to the public that pays passing attention to matters like this and maybe is not so good at connecting dots in terms of implications of policy choices.
Right, and I think one of the things is that people don't have a sense of history. Like, I'm in my early 80s, but when I was a youngster, you go to a neighborhood theater, and there are 2 or 3 ushers to show you to your seat. You don't find ushers in theaters today, and that's not because Americans of the day like to stumble down the aisles in the dark to find their seat. You in the 40s and 50s and a little bit of the 60s, you pull into a gasoline station. There's a young person, a kid, to pump the gasoline in your car and to check your tires and wash your windshields. Today, it's all self-service, and that's not because Americans of the day like to smell gasoline fumes while they're filling up their car. And in both instances, it's the minimum wage that has destroyed that kind of job. So this kid who would have been working as an usher, this kid who would have been working at a gasoline station, those alternatives are not available today, and so he's either wasting his time hanging on street corners, maybe engaging in criminal activity, and then not learning, not getting this kind of skills from early work experiences that will make him a more valuable employee in the future.
But one of the other things that's sometimes confusing, I think, is when businesses support an increase in the minimum wage. Are we to understand those businesses don't understand increasing the cost of their labor, or how should we understand it when businesses sign on to support?
Well, one of the favorite tricks of businessmen is to use every measure at their disposal to price their competition out of the market. Now, if you are a firm that has let's say a large firm, and you're facing competition from a small firm, well, you want to increase all kinds of regulations to make it more costly for a smaller firm or a new firm to enter the market and compete with you. And the minimum wage is a wonderful way of stifling competition. That is to reduce to make entry more costly. That's what businesses, and that's what many businesses want to do.
And right, well, precisely, and so. It's the barrier entry thing, I think, is the important point that people need to see. And so maybe for those businesses that support, we could say to them, how about we do this? Instead of raising the minimum wage, why don't we lower your prices for consumers and just make you sell all of your products at cost? How would that be? You want to sign on for that?
Well, and matter of fact, I think that one of the things that the listeners can pay attention to is that Adam Smith pointed out that in his Wealth of Nations that businessmen they have it in their interest to conspire, to run a conspiracy against the public, and they do it by having meetings and rigging the economic game.
Yeah, Professor, one of the problems is that a lot of people think Adam Smith is the quarterback of the Kansas City Chiefs. So we're going to have to, get over the educational hurdle to make sure that these people understand that. And then, just going back to a point, in addition to barrier of entry and getting rid of your competition, we're a heavily state employee union state, right? There's a lot of state employee unions. And oftentimes, this is true in California, this is true in many states, the contracts for these unions are tied to minimum wage. So if the minimum wage goes up, there's a factor in the collective bargaining agreement that the wages of everybody in that collective bargaining unit, their wages automatically go up per the contract. And I think there's a lot of political pressure, as you mentioned previously, by the unions to raise the minimum wage so the indexed rate of their employment would increase as well.
Yes, you're absolutely right, and that's just one aspect of it, and that is unions have always been in the forefront of child labor laws because young people are a substitute for old people and then doing many kind of jobs. And years ago, the child labor laws that they promoted used to keep kids out of working in dangerous factories and mines. The same labor laws keep kids from working in air-conditioned and plush carpeted offices and buildings. And so unions have always wanted to restrict entry because it means higher pay for them. And then there's something else that people don't realize, and I pointed out in next week's column, is that it's called next week's column is the title is Democrats hoodwinking blacks, and I'm pointing out that black leaders of yesteryear, such as W.E.B. Du Bois, Booker T. Washington, and Frederick Douglass, they always have been suspicious of labor unions because labor unions discriminate against black people. They have a long ugly history of racial discrimination against blacks and getting various laws written to handicap black competition. So unions around the world have not been a friend to minorities.
He is historian, syndicated columnist, and, of course, great economist, George Mason University economics professor Walter Williams. Thanks again for joining us, Professor Williams.
Thanks for inviting me.
Appreciate it.